would shake my faith. I was ready just to give it all away. I couldn't bring myself to live another day. If time and space could take me away, I'd go on a never-ending holiday. And in the perfect world, I wouldn't hear what they say. I'd follow him, but I'd do it my way. I would follow my dreams and never be led astray. I'd climb higher heights on my own staircase. And I know I'm not perfect, let come what may. I'm just waiting for the day when the pain goes away. They all say it's okay, but they lying to me. I'm so tired of them lying to me. This ain't the way, you can't tell me that it is. I've been living these lies ever since I was a kid. Symbolically baptized about 4 or 5 times and repented every time for every time I backslid. But
I lost my religion the other day. They asked me who do I believe in. I don't know what to say. At times I feel like flying away. Tired of everybody lying to me. I need some answers. Man, it's so hard to keep the faith alive. I often wonder who I talk to when I pray to God. I ask my Aki who he is and he say a lie. I ask a Christian and he tell me it's Jehovah Jah. Man, oh my God, I get so lifted when I wrote a lie. I'm supposed to stop, but I feel it bring me close to God. I hear a preacher yapping, acting like he quoting God.
Oh, man, you can't be talking like that. That's how you feel, man.
Man, you mean to tell me for 3 payments in 1999 I would never see Satan? My life has been a lie, cause I thought it was praying, believing, but obviously it must be paying, receiving. Damn, I guess I ain't got enough to go to church today. I would pray for money, but I don't know what I'm supposed to say. Like, God, you think you could let me hold like 5 to 9 something? Like, I lost my religion the other day. They asked me who do I believe in. I don't know what to say. At times I feel like flying away. Tired of everybody lying to me. I need some answers.
Now I'm no Christian, but swear to God I believe in Christ and empathize with anyone who's tried to take the life. Cause my existence is hard and they so quick to judge. So if that thought has ever come, just know you ain't the only one. See, my religion failed me hard, so I gave it up. Now all that remains is my connection with the only one. But they can't see that it scares them when I say I'm no sinner. They wanna know the deal, what's up with all these 10%ers. I tell them if they gotta ask, they should reconsider. That with 20/20 vision, they couldn't see the picture.
Alright, and why can't they see the picture?
Cause I'm a 10th of who I used to be, a 5th of who you wanna be. 10% of me foolishly wishes I didn't do this, but the 10% incessantly holds me down to eternity. Now a 4th of me looks up and tells my big bro to smoke for me, and now I'm on this mission for another quarter century.
I lost my religion the other day. They asked me who do I believe in. I don't know what to say. At times I feel like flying away. Tired of everybody lying to me. I need some answers. I lost my religion the other day. They asked me who do you believe in. I don't know what to say. Times I feel like flying away. Tired of everybody lying to me. I need some answers.
All right. Ooh, sunlight. It's nice, but it's not nice. Thank y'all for joining me, for joining us, because I do have a special guest here with me. If you're in the chat, if anybody's watching, anybody's listening at all, let me know if you can hear me. We got a delay on our end because of the closed captions, but I want to make sure you can hear me before we jump into it. And while I wait for y'all to tell me, because there is a slight delay, I'm gonna close this window. Give me 1 second. Oh, so dark, too dark. Yeah, okay. That's not gonna work, so there will just be a lot of light. Oh, wait. How's everybody doing today? We got more people here than I anticipated. Sort of, kind of. We don't promote the live streams too heavy. The live stream will be chopped up, and we'll release the videos, but we don't promote the live stream too heavy. And we'll talk about why later on in this conversation. But for right now, also I can't hear. Okay, there we go. Okay, you can hear me. Okay, cool. Thank y'all. I appreciate that. Appreciate it. All right, let's hop into it. For those who don't know me, what up, y'all? What up, everybody? I am Smalls. Smalls here, coming to you from Chumash and Tongva land, otherwise known as Southern California. Welcome to the intersection of Black and Sick. Now, before we introduce our guest and get into today's conversation, I want to begin, as always, by grounding today's topic and conversation in who we are and why this space exists. With roots in India's late 15th century, Punjab. Ooh, not an alarm. That was to remind me to be on time. Like I was saying, with roots in India's late 15th century Punjab, Sikhi was founded during a time of deep political corruption, religious violence, caste oppression, and economic exploitation. This was the backdrop against which our founding Guru Nanak Dev Ji began teaching the principles of Sikhi, declaring there is no Hindu, there is no Muslim, only one shared humanity, united under one divine. The foundation of this faith, the core of Sikhi, is justice, equality, selfless service, or seva, and the sacred duty to resist all forms of oppression, from langar to seva to dying for the right to religious freedom. The Sikh tradition has always required us to stand 10 toes down on the front lines of the fight for liberation. Our gurus taught us spirituality is inseparable from social responsibility. For Sikhs, justice isn't optional, it's sacred. And our ancestors, our Black ancestors, taught us that none of us are free until all of us are free. And that's why, even when the topics that we address here at Black and Sikh aren't explicitly about Sikhi or positioned squarely at the intersection of culture and faith, they are still deeply Sikh in spirit. And in the face of systemic racism, white supremacy, religious discrimination, state violence, economic injustice, our commitment to Sabar Dabala, or welfare of all, compels us to speak, to act, and to stand in solidarity. Because the admission price for community is accountability. And you can't claim pride and membership to a community that you refuse to be accountable to, as Angelica Ross says. So if you're here for the conversation, you want to build solidarity, inspire collective action through the lens of Sikhi, then you're in the right place. And we're going to get into it right now. I'm going to introduce our guest who finally actually just got to meet just a few minutes ago, like officially kind of meet virtually just a few minutes ago. But this dude's been on my mind for like the last 9 months, because late last year, he sent me a message and asked if I would participate in some research that he was doing. And I was like, yeah, sure, no problem, cool. And he was like, it should take you about 20 minutes. And then I saw the questions, I saw the survey, and I was like, oh dear. It I don't know if triggered is the right word, but it certainly sent me down a rabbit hole of research, because I realized it was kind of difficult to answer the questions, at least for me. Not because I didn't have the information or I didn't know, but because there was so much I wanted to say and I felt like it was too much. I felt like I'd be writing my own essay or thesis or dissertation, because this is something that I think about all the time. It's something that impacts me and affects my life all the time, and has since day one, since the day I was born, or really even before that, since my mom is Black. But we'll get into that in a little bit. We'll talk a little bit more about that later in this conversation. But for right now, I want to introduce you guys to Dilraj. Hold on. There we go.
Hello.
Introduce
Hi, Smalls.
yourself.
How are you?
I'm
Hi.
good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you
So
for
good to
having
meet
me
you finally.
on. I know.
course.
Finally, nice to see you actually digitally face to face. Well,
Exactly.
I'll get it started and introduce myself. So my name is Dilraj Grewal. Hi, hello, Sasrikal, Varjika Khalsa, Varjika Fateh to everybody. I met Smalls for the first time face to face very recently, but we have been talking on and off for the last year. Again, I am actually a graduate student at the University of Alberta, in which I'm finishing my master's thesis, and I'm also a graduate researcher. And my research focus has been on colorism in the Punjabi community, its intersection with caste, and how that has perpetuated, distorted, and also allied anti-Blackness within our community. So I'm really grateful to be here. Grateful is a small word. I appreciate so much, Smalls, for having me on, and I'm really excited to ground with you today. In the words of the late Walter Rodney, grounding with my brothers. Grounding is a time where we can talk about things like racial, social, anti-colonial, all these issues in a non-academic setting in which we're able to converse, talk, discuss our ideas without just having someone lecture at us. It is supposed to be a collaboration between the two, and hopefully we do some good grounding today. So thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. If anybody can hear my fan, let me know and I'll turn it off. But I'm in Southern California right now in June, and so I'm hot as hell. But if it does get disruptive to anybody, let me know. Yeah, something I'm gonna hop right in. I'm gonna take us a little bit all over the place for this very first part. But something that I noticed when you sent over your overview for your research was something that I only learned kind of recently, which was that the hierarchy, the hierarchical system that we tend to attribute to colonization and imperialism and all that sort of already existed in India prior to the British coming over. And that was only something I learned literally not long before you even contacted me. And so then I see it in your research and I'm like, oh, okay. So I'm really excited to be having this conversation with you. I told you a little bit about how we got here to this conversation today, but I want to back up a little bit. Part of the reason I struggled so much, and I haven't even spoken to you about this, but part of the reason I struggled so much, even though the questions that you were asking were so simple, or straightforward, I should say, not even simple, but really straightforward, was because of his anxiety. I think maybe it was a little bit of a trauma response. I don't know, like I said, I don't know if triggered is the right word, but it triggered something. Because what a lot of people don't know is that I got off social media almost like completely. And by almost, I mean like my account still exists, but I stopped using social media almost entirely. Unless I need to go in there and contact somebody, send a DM or something like that, I got off almost entirely. And that's because of the racialized abuse that we experienced when we first started Black and Sick. I could have never prepared for it. I think what hit me so hard was that I sort of saw myself as somebody who has, especially being born with sickle cell, which was considered a Black disease for a long time, and the fact that mostly Black people in America have sickle cell. So I've been at the receiving hand of anti-Blackness my entire life, right? It was just something that was just part of my everyday life, and I really understood it much deeper than my peers did, than the average person, because of having to interact with the medical system, the U.S. healthcare system, right? And despite that, and despite the fact that like I felt, I don't know, prepared, like you just couldn't have told me I wasn't prepared. Like I knew there was going to be like, oh, some people aren't going to like this. A lot of people don't like talking about race, and there's, why are you calling yourself Black? And I knew that, but I had no idea how intense it was going to be, how violent it was going to be. Like some of the stuff that was said, I was just like floored. I was genuinely taken aback, and in some ways, I sort of. Sorma gave me a heads up, because part of the reason he was so hesitant to do this project is because of his own experiences. And I'd heard about him, and I said, yeah, I get it. No worries. You don't have to do the social media stuff. You can just participate and we'll handle it from here. Oh yeah, no, Sorma was right. And I probably need to hit him up and be like, bro, my bad. You were right. But trying to answer those questions about colorism, about race, about caste, about anti-Blackness, it really, and not just anti-Blackness, but within the Punjabi community, within the Sikh community, within the South Asian communities, like it just forced me to think about things that I had just been avoiding and just put away. I just said, oh, these people are tripping. These people are out here wilding, like the N-words and the monkey emojis. And like they were getting creative with the hate, with the violence. Right. And I just said, oh, you know what? I'm not dealing with this. I clicked. Right. And it wasn't so much that I was personally offended, or that I was like, because a lot of stuff they were saying literally didn't apply to me. They'd be like, oh, you guys are so ghetto, you're so hood or whatever. And I'm like, if you only knew my background and where I grew up. Like, so it wasn't that it personally offended me, but it was just like, I struggled to know what to do. Initially I was deleting comments because I didn't want, the reason we created this space was for other Black Sikhs, or for other Black people who were thinking about exploring Sikhi and having the same or similar experiences that we had in the beginning, which was no landing place, no place to go to see, oh yes, there are other Black people who practice this faith. And so I really didn't want them to be like scared away, essentially, from seeing those comments. But I stopped deleting them at that point. I think it might have been a little late, but I stopped deleting them because I felt like, maybe they should know what they're getting into. Maybe they should have a heads up, because all the stuff that was very overt is all stuff that we had been experiencing in a very subtle, much more covert way, kind of throughout our time, practicing Sikhi. So that's one of the main reasons, which brings me to my first question, which is, why this topic? Why this research? Of all the things that you could research, you could be dabbling in, that you could want to tackle, why anti-Black? Because I know the landmine that you are stepping into by doing this. Why are you doing it?
No, first of all, I want to say, I know we had a conversation about apologies and things of that sorts, but comments like that should never be made. And I really just want to reiterate that from the get-go, that racism doesn't simply just leave us when we step into religious spaces or religious discourse. It's a fundamental part of the way the world has worked and the way global anti-Blackness works. So I do want to make that very clear from the get-go that, you know, people will do this because so often the Punjabi identity is conflated with Sikhi, and that those two naturally somehow go hand in hand when that's not necessarily a reality. And I know we'll get more into that later. But I think for my research, I think I have to really where it started for me. And this is part of the reason why I use a storytelling methodology is because when I was coming up with a thesis topic and I wanted to write about something that was personal, and I think so often we go, and because my degree is centered around social issues, so often we go to race, racism, things of that sorts. But I knew I had to make it personal, and I knew I needed to have what was my personal stake in this. And so when I was looking at my life, I was looking at the things that within the aspects of race and things of that sorts, I was looking at what had affected me the most, or what had, you know, really, I think when we look at our examinations of social issues, we often look at, you know, what has hurt me the most, what has caused me the most amount of pain. And that can be different for everybody. And I think I was looking at it in a more personal stance. And it really went down to, I think, my own issues with my own self-esteem, with the way that I looked. And a lot of it came down to skin color. And a lot of it was the colorism that I experienced growing up in the Punjabi community, and also growing up as somebody who, at the time, or I think just generally was imagined or was told was darker skinned. And so I understood that experience, and I could pinpoint points in my mind of where colorist things had been said, colorist ideology, you know, was being thrown at me, where I was also, you know, living in it in a way as a perpetrator of colorism, colorist beliefs, beauty preferences, things of that sorts. So when I first started, I said, okay, well, this is something that I want to research, it's something that I want to write about, it's something I want to talk about. But I think for a lot of it, I only knew it within the experience that I had with it. And I think when I actually first started developing a proposal, I had to think, well, you know, we often know where it started with us, but where did it start for everybody? And I think when I started going down kind of down that slope, oftentimes we would just hear things about, oh, well, colonialism did this to us, you know, colonization did this to us, which is not incorrect. But a part of me knew that it was deeper than that. And from my own research, I was able to find just how deep and colorism runs. And a lot of it was connected to the caste system. And the caste system is something that is one of the oldest systems of oppressions in the world. It's a very long history. It is a history that extends across so many regions. So I do want to say that when I talk about my research, caste is a very enormously complex social system, and it varies across regions, religions, languages, and communities. So when I talk about it, I do want everyone to understand that my understanding is shaped by my own positionality as a Punjabi Sikh researcher and the particular body of literature that I've engaged with. So I don't want to just offer a definitive explanation of the caste system, but rather the understandings that I've arrived through at my research. But when I started doing that, I realized that so much of when we talk about skin color, colorism, the caste system, colonialism, so much of it was operating on a global anti-Blackness. You know, I realized that colorism cannot exist without anti-Blackness. Those two things can't be divorced from each other. In order for a color hierarchy, stratification of color, for even, let's say, the quote unquote preferences for color, anti-Blackness has to exist to make that possible. And so when I started reading a lot of the literature, some of it did talk about caste, which was, you know, fairly new because people were kind of making those connections more recently. But so much of it was caste, colorism. So much of it was not regionally specific. It would categorize South Asia as a monolith, which, although the experiences are similar, again, it's experienced differently. And again, religion, language, so many of those things play a part. But so much of that research stops there. It would never talk about, well, where does this go beyond? Who is at the most harm at this? Who, receives this the most? And so because of that, I knew that I had to extend this research beyond, well, Punjabi people and caste oppressed people are affected by colorism, but who else is also affected? How does this play into into the global world? For example, me sitting here in Amaskuchi, Edmonton in Canada, colorism has not left the Punjabi community. So, and now we're operating in an area that isn't just majority Punjabi people. We have people of different ethnicities, people who racially identify as different. So I knew that anti-Blackness and an analyzation of that had to be important to my research, because at the end of the day, colorism cannot survive without disgracing and the violence against the Black body. It needs it to survive. And so I think that's where I kind of initially landed. So I'll go back to you if you have another question, if you want to delve further.
You actually answered my second question. Like you just slid right on into my second question. So you answered it completely, which was I see a lot of people talk about colorism and caste and different hierarchies but they'll get real close, except they won't just name the thing, right? They won't just say this is anti-Blackness, like it is what it is. And more importantly, they won't just say, hey, all these other things that we want to tackle, all these other issues, none of them will ever be solved until we solve this, right? Because ultimately the issue is white supremacy, right? And these days I don't ever really speak to white supremacy without also naming anti-Blackness, because essentially they work hand in hand, right? And that was something that I had to learn. There two things that made me think of is, one, I did a talk a long time ago, back when I was like deep in the advocacy world, and I was still doing public speaking for related to sickle cell. One of my like last talks, lectures, was about the need for tackling anti-Blackness when it comes to advocacy for sickle cell. And you would think that because it's considered a Black disease, because most of the people impacted by it are Black or of African descent, so and therefore racialized as Black here in the US, that would be something that we would have been tackled. Like we would, because the Black Panthers named it so long ago. Right. And all of us, whether you're an advocate, patient, if you're within the sickle cell community, you know what the issue is, because you've experienced things that other people do not experience. You know that the issue isn't the number of people impacted by our disease. That's not why we don't get federal funding. It's not, it boils down to anti-Blackness. Right. And I remember it was very important for me to give that talk, because I was just so sick of people tiptoeing around the issue, right? Like we talk about, well, cancer does this. Can we do this? Well, they do this. Well, how can we? Well, I don't understand what the issue is. And it was like, I was always the one standing up and being like, the issue is racism. Hi. Okay, we don't want, right? And just being that person. And then I would have people come up to me, like kind of sly on the low, like, you're so right. I didn't want to say it, but I was, and like that sort of thing. And I'm like, this isn't going to work. Like unless we can talk about it, unless we can name the thing, like this really isn't going to work. The other thing that I want to sort of name is when it comes to colorism, like the language that we use, it's so interesting, because I will hear non-Black people call themselves dark, or say that they were discriminated against for being dark, or for being like so dark, like, and just be like, she's just so dark. And I'm sitting there like, ma'am, what's happened? Like, right. But exactly. I also know that oh my God, I'm blanking right now. It's relative, right? Like, so you can absolutely be considered dark and experience colorism, despite the fact that you may be maybe nowhere near close to my complexion, right? And I knew about caste. I knew about the hierarchy situation when I visited India back in, I don't know, it might have been 2016. I went to go visit a friend. I went out there for my birthday, and I went to go meet up with one of India's first drag queens, Maya. So shout out to Alex if you're watching this. That's the homie. So I went out there and I wanted to meet him, and it was wild. When I got off the plane, there were two things that I noticed right away. One, there were way more dark-skinned people in India than I sort of imagined, because of the media that comes out of India, right? Like there was one point I was going through, like I was like really sick, and it was after my stroke, and I was going through depression, so I was stuck in the bed, and I had watched like every movie on Bollywood, every Bollywood movie on Netflix except like one or two. This was years ago. I had run out of Bollywood movies to watch. Despite the amount of content that I saw, I just was not prepared for the number of dark-skinned Indians, and that immediately struck me. The other thing that struck me was who was working what job. right? It was like so immediately apparent because all the flight attendants and all of the like people, you know, like certain people of certain complexions were working certain jobs. And then it was like you turn the corner and the janitor or the person taking out the trash or the person that, you know, doesn't have a position where they speak to anybody, who doesn't have necessarily a public facing position. We're all like my complexion or darker, right? And there's so much. I'm trying to keep the conversation like limited, but there's so much that we can talk about when it comes to colorism. And like you said, it's really complex because despite when people say sort of boil it down to skin color, it's more than just skin color. And we know that, right? Like we know that somebody could be my complexion, but have different features, have more, you know, Eurocentric, whatever features, and have different treatment, or be my complexion with different texture or whatever, right? You know, we know textures and features, all of those things. It's why there can be a South Asian person or Indian person who is my complexion or darker, and you still know they're not Black, right? Like you still see them, and despite their skin color, you know they're not Black American, right? And I find that very interesting. And folks who don't identify as Black, or you know, they will be quick to let you know they're not Black. And that is where I want to get into our first video clip.
Yeah,
because something that, well, actually, let me go back. What's your experience with like the Black community? Like, are you in community with Black people? Were you in community with Black people growing up?
Yes,
I don't know the diversity of like the area in Canada that you're in. So
I will say, so here in Alberta, the relative population of people, Black identifying people, it's relatively low in comparison to to America, to the United States, Canada as a whole. However, we do see a lot more Black populations in places like Toronto, those areas.
Right.
Again, but I really want to make it clear that again, Blackness, brownness, whiteness, a lot of these things and ethnic groups, they're so different wherever you go. And the Black, and this is kind of something that I've been kind of struggling with my own research, is generalization. And it's something that I do talk about as a limitation, and something that if I were to do this research again, how would I do it differently? I was so specific on my Punjabi participant pool because that's a specific ethnicity, that's a specific language, a group. But my Black participant group is, you know, whoever identified as Black. And we know that the experiences of Africans and Black Americans is not identical. Their viewpoints aren't identical. So I still did that because I knew that they still experience the world as Black people, but everyone's experience, you know, what is Blackness, brownness, or racialization in South Africa is not the same as what it is in Brazil or the States, right? So when we talk about this, that's so in Alberta, again, a lot of the population that I was working with was a lot of people who were first generation immigrants, a lot of them from Africa. We did have some people who had stronger lineages here in Alberta itself. But at the same time, I want to be careful with that because there's often this rhetoric in Canada that, you know, slavery didn't exist here, or that Black people are very, you know, recent to the Canadian landscape, when in reality, in Alberta itself, we had a large KKK presence as well because of the Black communities that moved from America over here post emancipation. So again, it's a lot of times, yes, relative to the States, we don't have, I think, that large population. However, I'm careful with those words because a lot of people has used that to erase the Black presence and the Black race, the racism that Black people experience here. And sorry, I forgot what your second question was in leading into that.
No, that actually, I was going to ask about your experience with Black people, with the Black community. And I said that, I was sort of like, I was saying that because I grew up in the Bay Area, which is one of the most diverse places, I would say globally, genuinely. And it's diverse in a different way than LA is. People hear about LA being like really diverse, or even New York. I think New York is probably more similar to the Bay Area than LA is to the Bay Area. And I make that distinction and I make that point because if I had grown up in some place like LA, where yes, there are a lot of different ethnic groups and races and whatever, but they're all very like siloed. There's a Black neighborhood, there's a brown neighborhood, there's an Asian, like, you know, you got your Monterey, like there people aren't mixing and mingling. Whereas I grew up on a cul-de-sac in the suburbs of the East Bay, and we were like, yes, the only Black family, but we also had a Filipino family. The family right across the street was Mexican, right? I went to school with South Asians and East Asians and Filipinos, and one of my mom's closest friends, it was basically called family, right? Like definitely chosen family is Filipino, and all of her sisters married Black men. So like, it very much was diverse in that way. And so when I would talk about diversity and things like that, you know, people were like, oh yeah, me too. And then I would realize like, oh, our situations weren't even remotely the same, right? Like you had to travel and go somewhere else to come across the next, you know, Mexican, the next Asian, the next whatever. And that simply just wasn't the case for me, right? And in some ways, I'm really grateful. I mean, in many ways, I'm really grateful for that. Because it meant that when I started hearing things about other cultures and other ethnicities, or even heard things about like women are so this, like women are so catty, and women are so like there's things like you just couldn't tell me that I just didn't believe because I had already experienced otherwise, right? Like I experienced my mom having a diverse group of women friends, and her not prioritizing her romantic relationship over everything else. Like all of her relationships were equally important, and chosen family. Like I grew up with all of that, and so it helped, but it also made me ask a lot more questions when I moved to New Orleans at 17, and it's mostly Black now. And I'm having like my first encounter with Asians in New Orleans. That's a very different encounter than Asians in the Bay Area, or and we'll talk about like, again, generalizing, because Asian, that is a broad group. So
we'll
specific.
And very similar to you, my experience was again, like I always grew up with quote unquote diversity, but it wasn't until high school where I had a large, you know, my high school had a larger Black population, and that's where I started, you know, making new friends. And what spearheaded a lot of the research and the anti-Blackness work that I've done for a while is in high school, there was an article that had come out about 2 Black girls in the States who were basically were being penalized by their school for wearing their hair in braids. And I remember for the first time, it came with a video as well, and a news report where these girls were talking about how the white girls in their class were allowed to dye their hair and do all these things, but they were being penalized for this. And then I don't know why, for some reason, sometimes in life things just hit you, and that really hit me hard, because I was thinking, you know, what is that like? What is that like, never being able to relax into your body, relax, and what Frantz Fanon talks about the racial epidermal schema, never being able to relax into your Blackness. And from that point on, me and a couple of friends had started a Black Student Relations Club and Black Students Union. So we started advocating for a lot of the anti-Blackness and the anti-Black racism that we were seeing within our school. And, you know, a decade later, luckily that club is still alive and well, and I'm very proud that we, you know, started that, and now, you know, people are still continuing that. And then and then I carried on with that work, a lot of indigenous decolonial work and things of that sort. But it wasn't until my master's that I took one of my first classes was Black Studies, and it was taught by a professor, Dr. Giselle Thompson, who's one of my supervisors now. And it was such a life-changing class for me, and it really made me think so much of how much anti-Blackness is steeped into our daily lives, how much it has existed for us. And, you know, I learned so much there. So going forward, I knew that had to be a part of my research as well. So that's where kind of it started for me.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Sounds like you got radicalized pretty early as
well. Pretty early on,
yeah. So that makes a lot of sense. There's a couple things, a couple places I'm going to take this. So one is anti-Blackness is not similar to white supremacy, right? Like you don't need to be white to perpetuate white supremacy, right? Like I always say, like you can be an agent of white supremacy all day long, and the same thing is true for anti-Blackness. And you mentioned that Black Americans and perhaps first generation or African immigrants do not have the same experience, and not only is that 100% true, but they also often do not have the same perspective. And I find a huge part of the problem, I won't say it's the only problem, something that I realized around the time I was in university was that the US exports a lot in terms of media and entertainment, and just how many people around the world are consuming American music, like US American music and media and TV shows and movies in ways that we absolutely do not hear, right? Like we export a lot of media. And so that is oftentimes the view of Black people that other people are getting. Black Americans, I should say, that is the view and perception and image of Black Americans that people are getting. And what I'm finding is that something I heard recently was somebody said, you have to remember that white supremacy and anti-Blackness is not the shark, it's the water. And I love that analogy. I don't know if somebody quoted that, or if that's I need to be like crediting somebody for that, but I love that analogy because it speaks to like just like how insidious it can all be and how unaware we can all be about it, and the fact that you have to actively work and be very intentional about getting out of it, about breaking those norms, about not perpetuating it. And that is true for even Black people, right? That is true for African immigrants, but it's absolutely true for Black Americans as well. There's a lot of anti-Blackness that I had to unlearn myself. There was a time, I would say, teenage me would have never worn a do-rag on camera because I grew up with huge respectability politics saying, you don't wear your do-rag outside. Like, it's for sleeping. We also didn't have like these kind of colors until I was a teenager, right? But like, it was very much not a thing you did because you need to be mindful of how you present yourself. And I absolutely understand it's like survival. And I also understand, like, I was in private school with like a bunch of white folks and like I was in predominantly white spaces. So I understand the respectability politics, but it was still something I had to like really, really unlearn. I'm about to play a clip because recently, if you guys don't know, British actor David Oyelowo, I think his last name, I'm not sure. He recently was on a podcast that I actually kind of watch every now and then. Mainly because I think Godfrey, one of the hosts of that podcast, has gotten a lot better about Black American African relations, right? And we always talk about like diaspora wars, and we don't want to perpetuate diaspora wars. And one of the reasons I'm bringing this up is like to say, yes, anybody can sort of like perpetuate this white supremacy, anti-Blackness, but also that like we need to talk about the issue is this an issue of mutual misunderstanding? Is it that like Black Americans and Asian Americans or Punjabi Americans or Punjabi Canadians or, Black people, do we just not understand each other? Do we just need to like maybe sit down and learn each other's cultures more? Or like, is that really the issue, right? I have some thoughts on that. But before we get to that, I'm actually going to play a clip. Now, this is actually from Sun Michel. Sun Michel is one of my favorite people. For those who don't know, one of my special interests is languages and linguistics. And Sun Michel is one of my absolute favorite linguists, and I'm really happy that so many people have found him now. I'm happy he's on social media. He's a professor at Harvard, and he's taught me a lot, which is saying a lot because, again, it's one of my special interests. So it's one of those things where I'm like studying all day long. I love talking about linguistics, right? But I'm not going to play the clip of what David said because for the sake of time, I really want to play Sun's response because I think it's going to set up the conversation about one of the primary issues or one of the maybe primary obstacles to dealing with and tackling anti-Blackness here in North America, not just the states of North America, right? And yeah, I'll say that. But David, on this podcast, they're asking him about accents and how he goes into these accents. And David is about to play an icon, a legend, a Black American icon, a legend, Bass Reeves, who was a lawman way back in the day. And he talks about his process and how he switches into the Black American accent. And he says he adds a little bit of subservience. And he really does not think very highly of the Black Southern accent. It is clear, right? And so I remember hearing that and being so not surprised, like not even a little bit, because the same is true for AAVE or Black English, right? I grew up hearing that's Ebonics. Ebonics is slang. It's just poor English. It's just terrible. And we now know that was actually my gateway to linguistics because I was trying to understand AAVE better, right? And I very much consider AAVE to be my first language, my mother tongue, if you will. And so it was disappointing, but I was really unsurprised. I mean, so we're going to play this because I really want to play Sun's response to him. Because I think part of the issue is that this is a small representation of what I think happens across the board. And it's why you hear Black Americans sometimes complain about Black British people or non-Black Americans playing roles or playing characters here in the US that are Black American characters, that are historical figures like Cynthia Erivo playing Harriet Tubman, despite the fact that she talked so terribly about Black Americans. I mean, I don't know if she's apologized to this day, but the things that she said about Black Americans is why I still can't watch. I can't even go see The Wiz. Like I can't, right? And it's why people complain, and people often feel like Black people are just complaining for no reason. We always have something to complain about, blah, 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 blah. And so I'm going to play this clip. Here we go.
characterizing the Black Southern accent as slow, a lot of slavery and subservient, David Oyelowo issued this statement of apology, unreservedly acknowledging that he was wrong and that he would try to do better in the future. And that's cool, except one thing. And I know you're going to think that I'm being nitpicky here, even petty, but hear me out. He did acknowledge that he was wrong, but at no point did he acknowledge that he was also incorrect. And I know some of you will say, well, that's just semantics, son, but semantics actually matter. You see, wrong and incorrect may share qualities and they are often used interchangeably, but they are not the same. Wrong is more subjective. It's more of an abstract, a matter of perspective, opinion. It can be applied to facts, but it's not coming from a place of being objectively or demonstrably inaccurate. Whereas incorrect is a concept that's rooted in facts. That is something that can be demonstrably.
So I just realized way too late that is not the clip that I wanted to play. He's right, but I was actually getting there because David ended up apologizing. And in his apology, he says, I didn't mean what he essentially says, I didn't mean what I said. And I think he believes that. I think he believes he didn't mean that. But I would argue he did. I think he did mean that. I think he maybe wasn't consciously aware that he meant that, and that's how he feels, and that's what he thinks of Black Southerners. But I would argue that's probably exactly how he felt.
What he meant,
how most people feel. That's how a lot of Black Americans feel about Black Southerners, right? And again, this is one of those things where I sort of had, I guess, the privilege of my entire family being from Arkansas, despite the fact that I grew up in California, and then going to university in New Orleans, which is in Louisiana. And so I've experienced the South firsthand. And one thing I always remind people is that people who don't have a formal education, they aren't just wildly ignorant and they understand systems of oppression, and they understand this thing that we're talking about here as well as I do, if not even better. Like, especially those who maybe haven't had the same class privilege I've had, haven't had the opportunity to go to university. I always say that, like, going to university, what it gave me was it allowed me to acquire language to speak to my experience. But I already sort of understood my experience. I understood what I was experiencing. I knew what was true for me. I didn't necessarily have the language to connect the dots and to speak to it and to say, hey, how do we fix this? But I understood it. I absolutely understood it. And I would argue that you have to understand it to survive. Those who do not understand it, you will not survive. You will be chewed up, spit out, thrown away. You will not make it, right? So I'm going to try to find this clip, but I don't know if you wanted to.
No, 100%. And I think that plays such a big part into not only the methodology that I use, which and I draw so heavily on, is Black feminist thought, Black feminist theories, because and Patricia Hill Collins is a big she's one of the big theorists who talks about it. But again, this has been something that's been talked about for decades and generations. People, enslaved women like Sojourner Truth, Audre Lorde, the poet, a lot of them have talked about, that knowledge is not just something that, you receive from the academy, that Black women have been theorizing and have been producing knowledge systems, and that their lived experience is a form of knowledge. It is a form of experience that is valid just as much as any academic knowledge would be, because it is something that, like you said, people understand their social position, they understand their social locations. And I think that it's so important. And the reason why I engaged so heavily with it is because I wanted to hear from the people. I wanted to hear, when we talk about colorism, I could have written just about anti-Blackness, but I wanted to hear from the Black people who are affected by it, right? I have Punjabi participants, but what does this whole aspect of talking about anti-Blackness, and we can theorize about it as much as we want, but if we're not representing the people who are actually effectively affected by it, then what has this research then just reproduced? The same, colonial type research that's been happening for decades, right? And even within that, I still situate myself as a researcher who is still operating on the aspect of privilege, operating on the aspect of conquest. Curiosity is conquest, right? We still operate, research itself is inherently anti-Black. It operates on the idea that the Black body is simply just allowed to be studied, that simply because I want to research this, no matter how well-intentioned I am, because I want to research this, I will. And that's something that, still is like a harder thing, I think, for even myself to navigate, but it's something that I think is still important for people to confront. So I'm glad that you brought that up about, again, what knowledge is valid knowledge and what knowledge is oftentimes just written off.
Right. Yeah. So the next part, we so often hear about like Americans going places and being, so like American centric, and which is true. Don't get me wrong. You're not going to catch me arguing about that. But what I would argue is that many people do the same thing when they come to the U.S., which is to not learn 100%. The history of the U.S. Because to learn the actual history of the U.S. would be to learn Black history. It would be to learn Indigenous history. It would be to understand where we've been, where we are now, why we are where we are now, right? And so many folks don't do that, and inevitably, what happens is somebody who is not Black American says or does something ignorant, blah, blah, blah. Then Black Americans push back, and then they say, oh, we're having a diaspora war. And they sort of want to just like dismiss it really all.
Yes.
And this is the same, not just for Black Americans and Africans or immigrants. This is true for Black Americans and literally any other group. Right. And I find, let me say this. For a long time, I won't say for a long time. There was a time where I thought maybe it is a mutual misunderstanding. Like maybe that's what this is. Because, and part of the reason I brought up my background and my upbringing was because there would be times where I would hear, one of my relatives say something that was like not kosher. Like we don't say that. That's maybe like offensive, or maybe be hostile towards an Asian business owner or a South Asian business owner or whatever, right? And I sort of said, well, sometimes some Black people do, say xenophobic stuff, but I knew from my own experience that it was deeper than that, and it was more than just that. I was like, it's not just that, because I immediately also understood that very often that is a response to what has been experienced. That is a response to what has already happened, because we didn't start off that way, right? Like even folks who maybe say something xenophobic here or there, right? That wasn't the initial. We didn't just pop out the womb and we're like, you know what? We decided we want to be the only minorities here. Like we want to be the only marginalized people. That's not what happened. In fact, we know that Black Americans fought for immigrants. We know that Black Americans fought right along with all of the rights that our ancestors were trying to attain for us. They fought for everybody else, right? They understood that none of us are free until all of us are. And so I knew it was more than that. And it wasn't until I read this book called We Are Each Other's Liberation. I got this recently from one of my favorite bookstores out here in LA. It's a Black woman-owned bookstore called Rep Club. And it again, once again, gave me language to speak to what I was experiencing, because I was like, I know my experience. I know that most Black people are not just going around being wildly xenophobic. And I know that sometimes we see things online, but I would argue sometimes maybe that's a very loud minority, or people are speaking out of hurt and pain and frustration and not having in any other way to communicate that. And don't get me wrong, I'm not ever saying that's okay, right? But I do want to speak to that because it came up again. Despite the fact that I've been like heavy in this research and sort of preparing this particular episode for months now, like ever since you reached out to me for your research, despite the fact that I've been in this for a minute, the Rick Chow verdict was pretty recent, right? Yes. And I remember when I first heard about it, I sort of kind of had an idea what was going to happen. I said, well, maybe, but I also understood that because of what he was charged with, and because of like the laws, I'm deep into law too, because I'm a nerd. So at this point, I already felt like I was like, oh, he's probably going to be found not guilty. And if he is found not guilty, based on what he's charged with, I don't even think that that's the wrong verdict. I think the problem was the wrong charge. We're not going to get there. I'm not going to get too deep into it. But I didn't watch a lot of videos about it because I was sort of like trying to protect my peace. I was trying to, I didn't want to be triggered. And I will say, sort of trigger warning, content warning here. I'm going to talk about police brutality, anti-Blackness, violence, stuff like that. So if you don't want to deal with that, totally understand. This might just pause for a few minutes and then we'll move on. When I was in elementary school, my brother was murdered by Oakland police. And even though you sort of had that like, it sort of like a lot of people have this innate feeling when you find out about a police interaction with a Black person, what happened? Like who did what, right? I think I was a little too young to fully understand that. And my parents sort of tried to shield me from a lot of things. So it wasn't until a couple of years later where I stumbled across the autopsy report that I found out He was shot in the back and at what they call a downward trajectory, meaning the conclusion was he was very likely on his knees when he was shot. And that the witnesses said he was running, that he had pants on that were too big. And so, yes, maybe he was holding his hands at his waist, but he didn't have a shirt on. So it was very clear that he didn't have a weapon. They didn't find a weapon at the thing. The report was all types of lies. So I sort of really understood. I said, something's not right here. But what pissed me off more than anything was that it was just like another thing. Like if you do research on it right now, there's like one article about my brother's murder. Like that's it. Like if I want any more information, I've got to go do a FOIA request and find the information. And I've said I might do that one day, but like stumbling across that autopsy report as a child, and I do understand why my parents shielded it from me, but I'm also glad that I found it, was really eye-opening in a way that I think maybe a lot of people my age wouldn't have been ready for, but because of my own experiences up to that point, I was like, oh, okay, I'm not sure. Okay, I'm not tripping. Like this, okay, yeah, I got it. And so I didn't go too deep into the Rick Chow verdict, and we're not going to talk about it a lot here. But it didn't surprise me. Nothing about it surprised me. And another aside I'll say is like you can't really convince me that the prosecutor wasn't on some type of shenanigans, because I think that whole thing does not make sense. I do not understand why he was charged with the way he was charged. But I also know that like you cannot claim self-defense and shoot somebody in the back. Like you cannot. Exactly. And it's so wild because so many people are trying to defend Rick Chow's actions, not the verdict. I almost understand defending the verdict, again, based on like the technicalities of the law and so forth and so on. But so many people, and that's a main reason I didn't want to watch enough content, because all the stuff I was seeing and the stuff in the comments, so many people were defending Rick Chow. And I immediately was thinking about my brother, but I was also thinking about the number of other people who have been shot in the back. Like and people talk about it so differently. Like when it's happening to other people and they're shot in the back and you're clearly like, how could that be self-defense? And it's so clear. Like I have seen people discuss this same set of circumstances, right? And condemn the shooter. But now here it's like, no, I get it. I understand why Rick Chow did it. And prior to, I don't know, several months ago, right now on my light switch, I have Latasha Harlan's right over my light switch. Because I was having yet another experience where I was like being followed around the store. Part of that is like me being Black, but part of that is also my appearance and how I present, where people are sort of like the surveillance footage of Cyrus being at the like thing and having that woman standing over him, like hovering over him, waiting to see if he was going to steal. That could have been me. It's happened to me so many times. It's unreal. Like there are times I have gone in the store just to get ice, brought my own water bottle. I'm just going to get ice because they got the little cube ice that's like, easily crushable, not the huge ice, right? Just going to get ice. And, I'm saying, hey, I'm going to get a couple bottles of ice. I'm going to put one in my backpack because I can't hold both. I had just gotten out of the hospital. So I really only had use of one arm at the time. And the person I told was like, yeah, sure. No problem. Fine. Whatever. Next thing I know, what are you doing? Are you going to pay for that? Like, what are you doing? And like, she's calling me out. And now I'm like, I just told him it's ice, bro. Like you're acting like this ice is coming out of your paycheck. Like, what are we doing right now? And yet that has been my experience my entire life. Like people just assuming I'm going to steal, like people just hovering over me, just following me in stores. Like I just fully understand what he likely felt like in that moment, regardless of anything else. And the number of Black Americans and Black people in general who have had a similar experience. And so we're going to talk about sort of that, but without talking specifically about Rick Chow. But yeah, I'll give you a chance to respond.
No, 100%. And first of all, I want to say I'm so sorry for the loss that you've experienced. But again, like these things all connect, and they don't, oftentimes they're so siloed off. But again, with Latasha Harlan's, with where Rick Chow, again, this whole the Rodney King riots, right? These things don't just exist separately from each other. Again, they're all connected, and it is a recognition of racist patterns that I think a lot of Black communities have been able to see. And although I'm not East Asian, again, this very situation could happen in an area that's, predominantly Punjabi or in a Punjabi business, right? These things, they're not specific to an ethnic group. And again, there's so many factors here that I think we do have to talk about. One is the fact that whiteness inhabits different bodies. Even in the deepest depths of marginalization, whiteness will still, and white supremacy will still find a way to center itself. So again, we don't come into this world as learned beings. Again, racism and all these things, they're taught, and a lot of people are so unwilling to let go of that. And a big one is also the model minority myth, and not in the sense just the fact that people who are, and specifically Asian or different minorities, who are simply operating on this idea that they think they're better, but it's the fact that as a society, and even the response to the Rick Chow verdict has fed into that. Again, one's first assumption that a Black individual is in the wrong is operating on the fact that a model minority, an East Asian minority, was probably the one who wasn't causing the issue, and all of these things that may be subtle, they're assumptions that have been shaped by anti-Blackness, and it's something that becomes a part of our norm. And that's the dangerous thing about anti-Blackness and racism as a whole, is that when it steeps so far into hegemony and into our society, it's so much easier for it to become normalized. It's so much easier to be like, well, this is the way that it is. And I think that that's the reason why so often we have been seeing this play out often, time and time and again. And in the words of Mark Twain, history doesn't often repeat itself, but it does often rhyme. So again, all these things aren't necessarily disconnected, and I think that that's part of the reason a lot of my research with colorism and anti-Blackness is because that again, racialized communities, whether you be Punjabi, whether you're East Asian, South Asian, again, we still benefit to a certain degree from white supremacy, and we still operate within its parameters. Right. And I think so much of it is the fact that there is still something in which this aspirational whiteness, how proximal can we be to the whiteness, because we know that whiteness is power. And so and I know we don't want to get too much into the conversation with Rick Chow, but I know with the conversation that we've seen about boycotting Asian businesses, and even in the book that you sent me today too, I think what was so important about it was that idea of, and the conversation we were having about, like, well, where is this? Is this a mutual misunderstanding, or, what is this? But I think Nopper in that book does a really good job, because
let me read. I'm going to read a couple passages from it, so you can keep going. Yeah. So this is what we're talking about. So this is one of the things that when I said I fell into a research rabbit hole, I mean it. I just because one of the questions that I was already asking before you approached me about your research was, are Asians the most anti-Black demographic? A question I would have never asked prior to doing work for Black and Sick, prior to that wave of vitriol, racialized hate. It's a question I never would have asked. I would have just been like, white people are the most racist, because that's what my experience had told me. It was, I just couldn't believe it. And one of the reasons I didn't stay on that question too long, and I didn't even really attempt to answer it, was because one, Asian is far too broad of a category, right? It's very similar to POC in the sense that it's just everybody who's not white, and it's it's sort of meaningless at this point, right? And it's one of the reasons I don't use POC and I don't identify as POC, but it was just too broad of a question, but then the problem was when I started to think, okay, well, let's sort of narrow it down. I found that it's probably the question is, the answer is probably going to be different for everybody, right? Because I can only speak to my experiences. My experiences are that I have found East Asians, usually Asian and Korean, and I didn't know that people couldn't tell the difference between Asians until I got to university. That was wild, but I think it's because I grew up with Asians that maybe I didn't know that was a thing. But for me, it's usually Korean and Chinese, and then South Asians that I've had the most difficult time from, that I've experienced the most anti-Blackness from. I can't actually even think of a time where I've experienced it from somebody who's Filipino. Like I said, I grew up with a lot of Filipinos, or somebody who's Southeast Asian. And again, this is not me sort of trying to condemn any particular group, but it sort of quickly made me realize okay, we're not even going to be able to answer that question. I don't know how valuable that question even is, but it was the starting point, and it's the thing that led me to other things. Part of which is the mutual misunderstanding. notion, right? Because that's all I've ever really heard discussed when it comes to anti-Blackness within various Asian communities, right? And so this is from We Are Each Other's Liberation, which is basically like an anthology. It's called Black and Asian Feminist Solidarities. And I'm going to read a little bit. I'm going to skip a little bit around. It says, the words terror and captivity are not commonly found in scholarship on Asian Black relations, particularly in the scholarship on Korean store owners and Black customers in the United States. But terror and captivity are there. Numerous studies show Black people report being watched, followed, and treated as criminals by Asian store owners. And if you go off the grid of the dominant commentary circulated and sanctioned in progressive and leftist spaces, you will hear more explicit discussions of what Black people endure as they shop in these businesses. In response to Black people reporting in academic surveys and interviews that Asian store owners treat them as criminals, many Asian American scholars, pundits, and activists reframe these accounts as indicative of mutual misunderstanding, quote, or quote, mutual stereotyping. According to this narration, we are told, yes, Korean immigrant store owners may have stereotypes about Black people as criminals, but in return, African Americans are xenophobic and treat Asians as foreigners. The problem with that is she talks a little bit more about how she goes into a little bit more detail there, but I'm going to skip ahead just a bit. The use of mutual misunderstanding suggests shared status or power, with each group contributing to each other's vulnerability and suffering. While some concede that, yes, Black people and Asian Americans don't have the same power or aren't treated the same by white people or the state, they will often return to a comparative framework to suggest that we are nevertheless similar, and that once Black people and Asian Americans realize this, Black-Asian conflict will decrease. She then goes on to talk about the fact that the mutual misunderstanding framework sort of suggests that we are starting from even playing fields, that everything has really just been the same, and we just kind of don't understand each other, and we maybe just need to like have a few more conversations, right? And the fact that when it's time to have these uprisings in response to things like the shooting or the murder of Latasha Harlins, that the Asian store owners will often employ the phrase, we don't have any problems. I'll just read it. The fear of another 1992 Los Angeles uprising is explicitly or implicitly expressed in such commentaries. We get quotes from Asian immigrant store owners saying some variation of, we don't have any problems with Black people. We don't want any, as a preemptive gesture. We can consider how to read this as, we don't want a problem with Black people, which of course is different from, we don't want problems for Black people. This preemptive move maintains the mutual misunderstanding framework, and in the process keeps analyses prioritizing Black suffering off the grid of progressive discourse. I thought that was like right on the money when I read that. And it was something that, again, that I understood pretty clearly. And I'm like, oh, now I got the language for this, because, you know, most of the stores that were owned in my neighborhood, in my granny's neighborhood, in most neighborhoods in the Bay were owned by East Asians or South Asians, right? And you might be lucky if you get a hello, right? But very often I didn't get spoken to. I got watched. But I wouldn't even get a hello. I wouldn't even get a greeting. And I sort of thought, like, I had this view of like older Asians as like, maybe their English isn't great. Maybe they just don't speak to anybody. And then once I started driving and I was like going around on my own, and I'm going into these stores and I'm realizing they're speaking to the white people that just came in right before me, or they're speaking to other people, or they're being really nice to them and like really happy to them. And then they just like look me in my face just with a blank stare. And I'm like, oh, okay. This is okay. There's something else happening here. Right. And again, my granny even is in a place right now that sort of looks like a ghost town. A part of Oakland that sort of looks like a ghost town. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that like she got tired of being disrespected going to the grocery store. She got tired of fighting and dealing with like a lot of the foolishness that comes with the only grocery store near her. And of course she's in her 80s and she doesn't drive it much anymore. So now we got to go pick her up and take her to San Leandro or take her somewhere else just so she doesn't have to be mistreated in the store that's near her, because there isn't any other option. Right. And so when we heard about that one, I forgot that one dude who was like, yeah, good luck. Well, I dare you to boycott us. Good luck, because, you know, blah, blah, blah. To me, I find that interesting because it's almost like, you know that there's a problem. Like, you know that there are that maybe we don't have a lot of options. Like maybe a lot of Black people are in food deserts. I think this is the same essay where she talks about Black neighborhoods being considered a captive audience, or that our neighborhoods are rife with exploitation and consumption. Yeah. It might have been an interview. I will actually post all of the sources and everything that I watched to get to this point. But it helped me it helped really confirm and affirm what I had already been experiencing, that this wasn't a matter of mutual misunderstanding. It didn't matter how nice, how kind, how much, Hindi I learned. It didn't matter that like I spent like over a year studying Hindi so I could just like go in and like, or time learning Punjabi and like it. Even at the 7-Eleven by my house, right? It wasn't until like I said something in Hindi that he knows like, oh, I speak like a little Hindi, that he starts speaking to me when I come into the store. Like before then, it was just like, you're lucky if they glance up, right? And anyways, I'm wondering what you've come across, what you've maybe what your research says, your understanding of like this mutual misunderstanding problem. And why is that where we've landed? Like, why have we not, because Amy Chen also says this, it is difficult to find scholarship. It is difficult to find research that goes past that point, that goes past, oh, this is a mutual misunderstanding problem. Like we really do need to tackle this and address this. And that's one of the reasons I was so impressed by your research, because you name the thing and you say it and you're like, that's not it. Like we got to go past that point. What is it? And like, what is your research saying? What is it showing you? What is it telling you? And how did you understand, despite the fact that there's not a lot of research out here that says it, how did you understand, oh, this is more than mutual misunderstanding?
I think that when we approach, oh, sorry. Let me see. Am I muted or
is that me?
Can you hear me?
Maybe it's me.
Sorry, I hope you can hear me. One second. I might.
Here, let me see. It might be me.
Can you hear me?
Okay, go ahead. You're good.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. No, so I think that where I came across this, again, this very similar, this idea of mutual misunderstanding, oftentimes it's very sugar-coated language, because we want to oftentimes dance around questions of race. We want to dance around questions about racism. And it's very much like, I like to look at it through the analogy of like, okay, both of you apologize to each other. Where were you wrong and where were you wrong? And I think a lot of that is a refusal to meaningfully engage with global anti-Blackness. And it's a unwillingness to understand not only the stakes that or the things that have led to these moments, right? So even within that article that Nopper talks about, and something that came up for me, a lot of progressive calls for, this Black Asian solidarity, Black East Asian solidarity, Black South Asian solidarity. It's that a lot of times these coalition narratives, they focus so heavily on finding common oppression that they minimize anti-Blackness among Asian communities. And that's the same thing that I found too. We often hear the words, allyship this, how can we be allies? And Manmeet Singh, who's a Dalit writer, has an article called The Ally is Dead. And he talks, he kind of very much critiques the words of allyship, that, allyship has never been meaningful. It's often been performative. It's often been trying to find a middle ground. It's often even that conversation of, in Asian spaces, well, where can we center the Black voice? Even just the semantics and this terminology of that, it acknowledges that we know that there's somebody at the center. We're comfortable being there ourselves. We can bring there somebody temporarily there, all while remaining there ourselves. And once that fizzles out, we're okay with people returning back to the margins. So I think that mutual misunderstanding thing, it suggests that when Black people protest mistreatment by Asian people, by South Asian, East Asian, or even any kind of other ethnicities not Black, their actions are often portrayed as xenophobic or irrational, rather than as responses to real experiences of discrimination. So again, Saira Rao has a really good documentary called Deconstructing Karen. And in light of this whole idea of the boycotts and these things, she offers a really good question too, that why is your comfortability more, and referring to Black people, she said, why is your comfortability more important than the violence that is our lives? And that's something that I've had to sit with too, because again, even within that conversation of, I know we've seen that video of that one man saying, well, go ahead, boycott these businesses. And a lot of these people talking about how we can't group Asian people into monoliths, et cetera, and that these boycotts. But at the end of the day, there's also acknowledgement that the value of the black dollar. Again, we've seen kind of what it's done with Target and other things too, but it's also the idea that the white people are not the ones who are shopping at these businesses. White people are not the ones who are, if the black presence in your stores, for example, if you didn't want black people to shop there, and we're still operating within anti-blackness, but if you didn't want black customers at all, then this wouldn't be an issue. You wouldn't be bringing up the fact that black people are boycotting, because it acknowledges the fact that we're still operating within white supremacy, and we've let white supremacy do this. It also refuses to understand why things are set up the way that they are. Why are so many grocery stores owned by East Asian people in predominantly black neighborhoods? It refuses to acknowledge things like white flight. It doesn't acknowledge the fact that there was mass disinvestment in black communities post World War II, post emancipation, things of that sorts. It also doesn't, again, realize the fact that a lot of these spaces were the only spaces where Asian immigrants were accepted into the folds of society. So I think a lot of that is, again, still being written by the narrative of, again, white colonial thinking or white supremacy of, well, these are the good ones. And again, still villainizing, creating the black criminal, creating the black villain. And I think so much of that, even in progressive spaces, this idea of finding mutual misunderstanding fails to acknowledge and actually confront anti-blackness. And why are we continuously for decades seeing the same thing happen over and over again is because we are refusing to meaningfully engage with that. And so I think that's where I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, so I have no idea why I can't hear you through my headphones. I was just listening to you through Instagram.
Sorry about that.
I'm gonna try to figure that out. But the last thing we're gonna wrap up here in a bit. What I really want to talk about is solutions. That sounds like this like huge giant undertaking. The sort of solidarity part of your survey, that was probably one of the easiest questions for me to answer, right? Like, what does it was kind of like I told you this morning. I'm like, when you have like so many options and like you don't know where to start, like that's kind of how I felt about the solidarity one. I'm like, oh, I got ideas. And I want to be clear, like the ideas are from black feminist thought leaders before me, right? Like everything I've learned are like bookshelves and like the books over here. So I'm not saying like, oh, I'm a genius and I have all these answers, but like our ancestors and those who have come before us have spoken about this. They've talked about this. They've figured it out. But man, white supremacy is powerful. But I want to play this right here because I kind of want to. I told you I started off with the question like, are Asians the most anti-black demographic? And I almost put that like on the flyer,
title.
And I was like, let me not rile them up too much like that. I didn't want them to think like I was actually trying to answer that question. That was the starting point. And then of course the Rick Chow thing happened while I was sort of like preparing for this, and then the question became, is a boycott the right answer? Is that the right solution? Is that the correct response? Is that the best response? Is it like whatever adjective you want to use? Because of course, however you word the question, it changes it slightly, right? But like, is it the right thing to do? Is it the best response? Is it what we need right now? And I won't say I've gone back and forth. I will say my initial gut reaction was like, what? We're not boycotting other marginalized people. And then at the same time, I thought like, wait, I kind of already am. And I thought at the time, I was like, how come nobody is talking about like what I'm thinking? And I didn't realize till this morning, I actually watched a Jemele Hill clip. Like I said, I had been like avoiding this topic, but Jemele Hill actually sort of addresses this. And I think part of the reason I didn't watch this because I thought she was going to have like this really whack response because of what she had said about the boycott before. And I was like, man, don't disappoint me, man. Like, I'd be disappointed when black women be out there having the wildest, most ridiculous takes, right? So I was like, I'm going to be disappointed by Jemele Hill. I like Jemele Hill. But I'm glad I watched it because she actually says a lot of what I was thinking and what I was preparing to come on here and say, like, I haven't seen anybody had this take yet, but surely somebody has it, but I haven't seen it. Which is something I did a long time ago was stop going places where I'm disrespected constantly. I stopped going to places and space. I stopped allowing myself to be in spaces where I was clearly unwanted, where they were making it clear they didn't care whether I was there or not, or they wanted my money, but they didn't really want me. Like they didn't see my full humanity. They were disrespecting me. They were mistreating me. I just stopped going places that made me feel like shit. Like I stopped going places and being in spaces and dealing with people who just didn't see it for me. And so if that means I got to travel a little bit further to go to a different 7-Eleven, and that's what I'm doing, right? But because it was it was just worth it. Like it was just like convenience doesn't come close. It was just worth it to not have to deal with the stress. And I can't tell you, like, it does make a difference. Sometimes when you're so used to something, you don't realize like the effects it's having on you, right? So I'm not like sort of bracing myself and anxious to go in stores. I mean, like, I would go in stores and like have my hands like out, like away from me. Another thing I should mention is I carry a backpack, right? Again, I told you Cyrus's surveillance footage could have been me. I carry a backpack. And part of the reason I carry backpacks is because I got a lot of stuff. I have a disability. I always have medication, a bunch of other stuff on me. I carry a backpack. I've always carried a backpack. And I also know that makes me appear younger to people. And so then I get, I'm treated like a child, and then people, it just comes with a lot of other assumptions, right? And so I will go into places and kind of keep my hands. I want you to see my hands. Like, I don't want you to think I'm tucking anything in my bag. Like, if I have to go check my bag for something, I'm putting down whatever's in my hand. And I'm like, where's the camera? I just like, that's how I'm operating. Right. That's typical for me. And I just noticed, like, when I stopped going to places that made me feel like I needed to do that, I stopped doing it. Like it was just so much more relaxing. And I was like, is this what other people experience? This is what shopping is like for other people. This is nice. Like, this is wild. I can understand if you've never experienced what I've experienced, that you think I'm tripping. Like you think I'm tripping. If this is what your experience has been like, oh, okay. I see why you guys don't get it. Right. And so I'm going to play this clip and also try to figure out why I can't hear Dilraj. Because everybody else can hear you. You're clear on the video. So I'm going to try to figure that out. But I'm going to play this. Oh, let me share it first. It'd be helpful if I shared it. There we go.
It hurt because I grew up with.
Let me see the playback. I just want to make sure. I be having things on 2x. I'm gonna make it on 1.5.
I'm the same way. Don't worry.
I know everybody can't do 2x, so I'm gonna do that. So let's make
a lot of Asian culture in my childhood. Watching kung fu movies, getting into anime, learning Japanese in college, and spending 3 years in Japan. Some people took that information, paused the video, didn't look at the rest of what I said, and pretty much wrote in the comments, oh, she's covering for Asian people because of her experience with Asian culture. Thing is, the experience that I have with Asian culture is in other Asian countries, derived from other Asian countries, away from the American experience, away from the American model minority mentality that some Asian people have grown to have here in the United States. That mindset is different in other Asian countries. And even though those countries also have a history of siding with white supremacy, the histories are completely different than the Asians here in the United States. And as somebody who lived in Japan for 3 years, I can tell you that when it comes to Black people over there, the mindset is a lot different and comes more out of a place of literal ignorance of Black people than anything else. It is completely different than the model minority situation and mentality of people trying to uphold white supremacy to get themselves a leg up that we see here in the United States. And that is why here in the United States, even though there are individual allies that come out and speak truth to power in all demographics when it comes to the struggle of being Black in America or the struggle of Black Americans in general, the Black community indeed stands alone in this struggle, especially when it comes to lived experience and persecution in the United States. There is no other demographic on the whole that constantly deals with what Black people specifically have to deal with. And I mean not only the brutality when it came to our history here and slavery and Jim Crow and all of that, I mean the systemic laws and the way they are interpreted even to this day, as we are seeing now, which has caused this whole mess. The fact that Derek Chauvin only got 22 years, but Carmelo Anthony got 35, tells you everything that you need to know. In my last video, I said that Black people are tired. The Black community is tired of being silent about these issues. They are tired of not knowing who is an ally and who is not, because not now one of the demographics can be trusted, even with individuals within each demographic coming out to speak truth to power. If you see a pack of lions and one lion is man's best friend, you're not going to go up to that pack to try to see which one is man's best friend, are you? And the fact that almost every demographic knows, and it is ingrained in their psyche, that crapping on Black people and crapping on the Black community is the fastest way to succeed in this country. People do that, and they uphold white supremacy as they do so. So this boycott, this Asian boycott, which started as Black people boycotting this one business, and then that coward on the internet, Hear Me Out, came out and challenged Black people to boycott every Asian business. This boycott is about more than that. Even though Hear Me Out was the catalyst of the Black community boycotting Asian businesses, even Asian creators on the right side of history speaking truth to power of the Black struggle in America will tell you that this boycott is necessary. It's necessary because since 2024, November of 2024, Black people have been moving as one sound, one voice. And this has been giving a lot of people a lot of panic in a lot of ways. Because honestly, since the civil rights movement, Black people have never been so cohesive. And that collective bet in November of 2024 turned a lot of heads. Not only did Black people decide that they were not marching, they also decided that they were going to start using the real power that they have, their pocket. And there are two ways to look at this boycott, because this boycott is the latest in the FAFO that this country has been asking for. For one, this is another thing that Black people are moving as one on. This is another thing that Black people are coming together and saying enough is enough. A lot of Asian businesses moved specifically into Black communities because white communities would not have them. But before there were Asian businesses in Black communities, there were Black businesses in Black communities. I've done multiple stories on the different Black towns with Black businesses that were thriving, that were destroyed in this country because white people, white, racist, inferiority complex people did not want to see those Black communities thrive. So they did what they did not do to the Koreatowns, the Chinatowns, the Japantowns, and they destroyed those Black towns. They destroyed those Black towns until Black people lost the will to create them. And couple that with desegregation and civil rights, Black people started patronizing other businesses, including those Asian businesses that moved in instead of the Black businesses that were created. Those Asian businesses were allowed to move in there because they could get loans from the bank, unlike Black business owners and entrepreneurs. Indian businesses, same thing. Somali businesses, same thing. Everybody was able to get the means to create a business that Black people were not afforded, even after the civil rights movement. They created a whole credit system in this country to make sure that Black people were not able to get loans. So with Black towns broken up and other businesses from other demographics moving in, Black people patronized those businesses and have quietly worked our way up to have our own businesses scattered throughout the country, not in a concentrated area, because when we did that, they were destroyed. And one thing Black people are not is insane, is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. We moved differently. And we moved individually. And yes, this was a blow to the Black community at large because we were not able to create the support for each other that we should have been able to create if we still had our Black towns. So with this boycott, we are doing a couple of things. We are taking our money back, our power back. We are specifically putting our dollars back into the Black community. And not only are we doing that, but we are taking people with us. People who are influenced by Black movement. Other Asians who speak truth to power for the struggle of Black people in America have also joined in on this boycott. White people who agree and want to support the Black community have joined in on this boycott. And that right there, influence that Black people have. Even as we are 14.4% of the country, we have such influence in this country that when we move, others follow. And that is why they're mad. That is why you have business owners coming out so angry about this boycott. That is why Hear Me Out was ran off the internet. It wasn't Black people who ran him off the internet. It was other Asian business owners who ran him off the internet because they realized that.
Okay, I'm going to stop it right there. We've gotten to the part that I really want to address. So I really want us to close out with just sort of like responding to like, is the boycott the right move? I've heard a lot.
Yeah.
Like I said, I started with no, why would we boycott? And then I said, well, I kind of already am, and I didn't think of it as a boycott. And again, I think that's because I was obviously like Asian is a broad category. Like I don't whatever. But I realized like, oh yeah, I also was raised not to go to places where you're clearly not wanted, right? Like not to keep putting yourself in the same situation. I've had enough experience. There is a reason I no longer allow myself to be the only Black person in a white space, right? That is something I absolutely don't do. I think they move different. And as the homie Wyndham says, my mama didn't raise everybody. So we don't always have the same values. And I find it interesting because I think Black people, Black Americans have more in common with Latin folks, Latinx folks, and Asians as well, right? I think we have more. Like the more I hear about like culturally specific, culturally relevant stories and your upbringing, I'm like, oh yeah, us like we have our version of that, right? And so I think it's. I think that's why it's so frustrating for me because yeah, my initial thing was like, oh no, don't do that, but I was like, oh, I kind of already am. I started hearing people give their feedback. A lot of, Asian creators saying like, what else do you want them to do? But one thing I really want to focus on of all the things that she said here is, I was like, my first reaction to her video and to the guy who was like, I dare you to boycott Asian businesses. I was like, you're goofy. You sound goofy as hell. Exactly. And I guarantee you don't speak for the Asian community. And a lot of Asian people are probably pissed at you right now. Even the ones that hate Black people are probably mad at you right now and telling you to shut up and sit down in their head, right? But that brings me to what she said about good Asian business owners. And that's what I want to speak to. Let me pull this down. That's what I want to speak to is, so the question is, there's been a lot of discourse. Do you boycott all Asian businesses? Why are we doing all Asian businesses? Why are we not being specific? And again, I think Jamel Hill has a really good response. I might play that as we head out. It was kind of difficult to figure out what to play. But I'm at the point where I'm like, yeah, I don't know what else what else to do from here, because one thing that I know and one thing that I believe is that there is no neutral, there is no apolitical, there is no like true center. Like you either are or you are not, right? Like when it comes to liberation and freedom and civil rights and oppression and justice, it like you are or you're not. If you are not, like if you are not standing up, if you're not speaking up, if you're not fighting, if you're not being proactive, if you're not active, then you are actively on the side of oppression. Like you are on the side of operating really against liberation, if I'm being honest. And so when people talk about, well, what about the good Asian business owners? One thing I will say, despite the fact that my view, my perception of Asians in general, and I would say mostly East Asians, has been relatively positive throughout my life. There is one thing that has like sort of stayed with me, that I saw that was different from everybody else. And it was that the Asians that I knew didn't speak up. They weren't vocal. They were very much like, I'm minding my business. Like that don't got nothing to do with me. I'm good. Y'all, like they just weren't vocal. And I don't think that you can be a good, really anything of what we're talking about, right? In the grand scheme of things, if you are unwilling to speak up, right? I remember a Sikh said this a couple years ago when we were really talking about what was happening because and the whole, Israel Philistine thing. Like he was like, I think we should mind our business. I don't think this has anything to do with us. And I was so floored by that take, because I'm like, if anybody should be like, I don't understand how you can have that take, but it is something that I've heard where a lot of people are just like, I just kind of want to mind my business. And that is something that I've seen quite consistently until the last few years. It wasn't really until the last few years that I started to see more and more Asians speaking up. And I want to be clear, my experience does not mean that is what the reality is, because there have been plenty of Asian, East Asian, South Asian, Southeast Asian, all kind of people from the Asian diaspora, right, who have spoken up, who have been vocal, who have been on the front lines right along with Black Americans. So I'm not saying that hasn't been the case. What I'm saying is like, typically you see Black people doing it, right? Typically Black women and Black queer folks, to be more specific. But like, what makes a good Asian business owner? Because if you know this is happening and you say nothing and you do nothing to change it, are you really good? Like maybe you're not an asshole, like, right? Maybe you're not following Black people around the store, but are you doing anything to make it better? If you know the problem, can you still be considered a good Asian? Like, do you get spared in this like boycott thing if that's what we're doing? I don't know. What are your thoughts?
But once again, I think it's and I'm so many things to touch on, but I think it's the refusal to take part in quote unquote what is antithetical to white supremacy, right? Who is in power? Who do we want to be closest to? The person who's in power. And I'll quickly draw back to something in my research that may seem a little disconnected, but it shows up again in I think that idea of anti-Blackness. So in the early 20th century, and this is something that I came across in my own research, was that U.S. naturalization laws restricted citizenship to free white persons. So it made legal whiteness a gate-kept category. And in it, we had Bhagat Singh Thind, who was a Sikh migrant, and he argued that, and this goes back to some of the caste conversations we were having, that because his high caste stock, his high caste background technically made him Aryan and quote unquote white, and thus he should be eligible for naturalized citizenship as a free white person. So, but the court did reject this claim on the basis that his brown skin didn't read within US racial common sense. So back to this idea of race as a social construct. And then the contradiction, I think, was telling, because Aryan could function as a claim to light skin lineage and caste privilege, but it didn't translate into whiteness when whiteness was being policed as a visible embodied category. And now the reason I bring that up too is that a Japanese immigrant a year prior named Takao Ozawa, who had lived in the US for 2 decades, he tried to do the same thing. And now, he had done it originally, but his basis was the fact that, well, I'm lighter than most white people are lighter. I'm whiter than most white people. And they still rejected his plea because it held that white person meant a person what is popularly known as the Caucasian race, and that simply the color of the skin was impractical because he was ineligible because he wasn't Caucasian. So I think that what happens there is that, and the reason that I want to bring that up is because, a lot of time people have brought that up because they talk about that in conversations about race. But as I did my research prior, and this is something really good that I'll pull up, that immigrants at the time already understood that citizenship and belonging were racially tiered, and that by pursuing inclusion through a claim to whiteness rather than challenging racial inequality itself. So again, Blackness at the time was already a legally stabilized category, but the social stigma and harsh discrimination that was attached to Black status discouraged applicants from seeking entry on that basis. So instead, immigrants and a lot of Asian immigrants, and as I think I forget who says this, I think it's Horn as her last name. She talks that they quickly learn the value of being white rather than Black. So learning to cast yourself as white, and that goes back to that conversation of, again, the model minority and things of that sort. Again, somebody can need Black customers. They can be friends with Black people. They can still, again, have relationships with Black people, all while still viewing Black people through the lens of criminality, danger, and the biggest one, inferiority. And I think that's something that oftentimes that's the danger to oversimplifying the relationship as a mutual misunderstanding. Again, on the light of the boycott, if businesses depend on Black communities for revenue, then those same communities and the Black community should have the leverage to demand respect, fair treatment, and employment opportunities or accountability when things like, for example, this Rick Chow case happened. And I think one of the things that we have to really understand, and why we keep going back to white supremacy, is that white supremacy's greatest success is not simply getting everyone to, love whiteness or have that aspirational whiteness. It is also its greatest success in getting different groups and different marginalized communities to organize themselves around anti-Blackness. So I think when we think about, what makes, when we talk about solidarity and what makes the good Asian store owner, I think we have to start with actually being accountable to what are Black people asking of us. Because in that question, and the reason why I had that question was that I actually wanted Black people to state very matter of fact, what do you want to see from us? Because too often when we talk about allyship and we talk about allyship within our own spaces, without the Black voice, we talk so often, well, this is what we could do. This is what we could do. But we're not hearing what Black people actually want from us. What do they want us to do? How do they want us to show up, right? Sometimes it's, actually participating in things, taking a stand. Sometimes it's also about being silent, knowing when to be silent, knowing when to know that it's not about you. And again, there's no answer for that specific a question. But again, it's about, where have we historically, socially, and again, on a personal level, been actually trying to confront the anti-Blackness that has possessed, again, a lot of our livelihoods. And I think that's a lot of the questions that I've had to ask within my own research, but again, the conversations that I think Asian communities need to be having, and I think any marginalized or racialized community that's not racialized as Black should be having. Because again, the Combahee River Collective and a lot of Black feminists theorists have talked about the liberation movement, that if we are able to solve social upheaval by starting with Black women, that would liberate everybody, simply because the Black woman is one of the most marginalized peoples, right? So I think a lot of it is engaging with that. So
yeah. Yeah, so I wrote a few things down that I think they actually all work together. But one of the first things I thought about was using the master's tools to dismantle the master's house, or as Audre Lorde, who might be my favorite of all time, says, you cannot use the master's tool to dismantle the master's house, which means the same tools, the same infrastructure that holds up these systems of oppression are not going to be the tools that we use to dismantle them. That's just not how it works. And it makes me think about the ways they talk about how white supremacy just continues to reinvent itself, right? The moment you think you have white supremacy defeated, the moment you think, oh, we got them there, they're like, no, just kidding, right? And I think that's never been more apparent than this administration, right? The Trump administration, right? And because statistically, they are a minority, right? And this is also why I don't love the terminology of minority. I always use marginalized, because I remind people that billionaires are a minority, and we're not fighting for their rights. But anyway, so that was one of the things, which. And I was just so I'm going in order of what you said. And then the next thing I thought, I wrote down was, I thought about the people who don't actually want true liberation, but really they want the freedom and the power to oppress others, right? They want to be on top. They're not really concerned with everybody's collective liberation, the collective well-being of everyone. They just really want to be on top, right? I see that a lot, and I see of all races, all genders, all backgrounds. That's true for a lot of people. I think that is perhaps a system of the hyper individualistic culture that we have here in the U.S. But it's not limited to the U.S., of course. But that's one of the primary things, which then brought me to the fact that it is so important and to remind ourselves and each other that the primary issues are systemic and not individual.
Ritual.
Right?
Yeah.
Because based on my personal experiences in childhood, like there wasn't a day that I would have thought like, oh, we would be talking about a boycotting of Asian businesses, because I had great experiences growing up with Asian folks, right? And then I got into my teenage years and I'm out in the world on my own and I go, oh, okay, they're not all so great, but I still have a balanced view. And then as I get older, I go, oh, okay, I'm starting to understand now, right? So it's not individual. It's not a matter of we just don't like each other. It's not a matter of well, if only you understood, if only we just recognize our differences. And I think a lot about the fact that like we talk about race being a social construct, but it's becoming more and more clear that like most people, even people who say that, don't fully know what that means or like truly understand it, right? And I think those two cases that you brought up are just chef's kiss. Oh, excuse me, sorry y'all for whoever's wearing headphones. Chef's kiss for prime examples of race being a social construct. It doesn't make sense. It's not logical. You can't really explain it. You always have to do it. It's a lot, right? And even it is difficult for even white supremacists to justify and make valid their thoughts about white supremacy, because it's not logical. It doesn't make sense. Like racism, right? We know that like it's more than just skin color, as we said. It's also hair texture and how you appear and like where you're from. And I really hate when we call white people Caucasians, but I'm not going to get into that right now, exactly. Right? But I mean, it's as deep as the fact that like most people do not capitalize the B in Black. And when we're talking about race and ethnicity and background, it's the only one we don't capitalize, right? Like the only like culture, race, and ethnicity that we don't capitalize. We don't see Black American as a particular culture, right? Like even other folks in the African diaspora are constantly trying to tell us we don't have a culture. I mean, I got that comment so many times when we first started Black and Sick, like because our tagline was like the intersection of culture and faith. And it was like, you guys don't have a culture. Like what culture? Black people don't have a culture. There's no Black, like the number of times I got that was like sort of mind blowing. But it sort of reminds me that it's the water, not the shark, right? Like it is everywhere. It is the system. It's the foundation upon which this nation is built. And so when we're talking about like boycotts and solutions and solidarity and what it looks like plain and like what's the answer? Like, right? Like what is the solution? Because I'm gonna tell you now, I'm committed to. I'm still not going anywhere where I'm mistreated. But it also doesn't sit right with me. I also realize like my liberation is tied to everybody else's, the most marginalized among us, the most vulnerable among us. And so I can't throw my hands up. Like I understand why other Black people say that. I'm telling y'all right now, I understand it on a deep, like ancestral spiritual level, like desire to be like, F it. Because when you are fighting for people that you know hate you, or you're fighting for people, you're fighting for their well-being, you're fighting for their liberation, and they can't stand you, or they don't even see your full humanity. Maybe it's not that even they hate you. They don't even consider you. I experience this a lot, like having a disability and being a member of the disabled community, because people are constantly forgetting about disabled people. They'll ask something wild, like, who needs that? Why would you do that? You're just being lazy. And I'm always like, hey, disabled people exist. Reminder, right? Like even that is dehumanizing. And so if it's not one thing, it's another. It's the constant reminder that people see my Blackness first. And in many ways, that would be fine. I don't have a problem with that. I'm proud to be Black. I want to be Black in this lifetime, the next lifetime, every timeline, every universe. Like it's their reaction to it. They're the ones that have a problem with it. And that in turn is what makes it my problem, right? And the last thing I'll say before I let you chime in on this is something that really was striking to me when we're talking about like mutual misunderstanding and the way that people respond is Nopper said in this essay how people will quickly respond, I don't want a problem. I don't want any problems, right? And I find that so interesting because not long ago, for those who don't know, I live in a very, very brown neighborhood. When I say very brown neighborhood, I didn't know that when I moved here. I was moving for an internship, and we were just trying to find a place real quick. And so I didn't know that the neighborhoods were like as segregated as they are down here. And so I very much stand out in a very, very Latin neighborhood. I mean, I can go more than a month without seeing another Black person. Like my junk mail is in Spanish, my ads are in Spanish, like they're just brown, right? And so, but I've been here for like a really long time. And I remember the other day, my neighbor, not the other day, I remember a while back, my neighbor was like revving his motorcycle, and I was like working from home and I couldn't hear. And so I went outside to say, hey, can you just pause that for a second? Let me finish this. That's what I was trying to say, right? I couldn't even get to that conversation because when I said, hey, can you da-da-da, he went, I don't want any problems. I didn't want any problems. Like you would have thought I walked up to him with a weapon. Like the way he was like, I don't want any problems. I was like, what the heck? It was such a weird response to me. That same neighbor would then go on to call me a nigger like a couple weeks later, or I mean, a couple weeks ago. So it kind of, when that's the first thing that I thought about when I read that in that essay. And it's the first thing that I often think about. It's anyways, let me stop right there. But I will just say, I'm interested in what either your research, your experience, your feelings, your knowledge is telling you about what the solution looks like, what the path forward looks like. Where do we go from here when it comes to, and if you want to be specific, because again, even though for the sake of time, we haven't had time to like really pare it down to like just South Asian and be really specific, I want to make it clear. I do understand Asian is a really broad category, but yeah, if you want to speak to like, where do we go from here?
I think that is the challenge itself, right? Even within my own writing, I've come to the stuck of like, okay, so this is where I'm at, and that's the best question. Where do we go from here? Like, what's next? And the reason why that question was so important of asking Black participants, like, you know, what does meaningful solidarity look like and what can we be doing? Because the reality was I didn't have an answer. I didn't know, well, I knew that colorism was wrong. I knew it was perpetuating anti-Blackness. I knew Black people are affected by it, but I didn't know, you know, what is the solution? Is it social upheaval of all people, you know, on an abolition level? But I think a lot of it comes down to that fact again, and I bring up that idea of why allyship isn't something we should be moving towards, but what Patricia Hill Collins talks about in Black Feminist Thought about coalition building. And now I know that also gets some critique now, especially even in Knopper's essay that she talks about, but coalition building is necessary because it systems of oppression are interconnected. Right. Even within the fact of, you know, who is the one perpetuating it, even like as Asian people perpetuating anti-Blackness, there is still the connection with white supremacy there. So through concepts, I think, and Patricia Hill Collins does a better job of it, but through concepts like intersectionality and the matrix of domination, she does a good job arguing that race, gender, class, sexuality, nation, all these things, they don't operate separately because oppression is interconnected. So resistance must also be interconnected. So her and even I would say I'd be careful to distinguish coalition from sameness. So again, back to that conversation of mutual understanding. So she doesn't argue this, and I wouldn't argue this either, that everyone experiences, you know, oppression in the same way, or that our oppressions necessarily, you know, just because we share them with each other, or let's say you and I are grounding right now when we talk about my experience with colorism, your experience with anti-Blackness, that doesn't mean that we're experiencing oppression in the same way. But rather that coalitions, they should be built through recognizing both shared struggles and meaningful differences, and that knowledge becomes important precisely because it emerges from a specific social location, and that others can participate in Black feminist projects, but they cannot erase Black women's leadership or standpoint. And I think that's a big thing. Too often, the same way that, Asian is very broad and expansive, simply talking about quote unquote Black issues, or again, is very broad. It refuses to acknowledge, intersectionality, the way how Black women, Black people as a whole, how every individual has their own relative and intersectional experience. So when we talk about this, it's very easy to talk about, well, let's confront anti-Blackness, let's move forward. But it's very easy for people in Asian communities to kind of still have a hold over those conversations and things of that sort. So uh, as Colin says, Black women being in charge of Black feminist thought doesn't not mean that others are excluded. So
Mm,
coalition building really requires accountability. So rather
mhm,
than simply claiming the same experience, and we have to see that difference is, especially when we're acknowledging that anti-Blackness exists in our communities, that difference is not necessarily an obstacle to solidarity. It is the
mhm,
basis for more honest solidarity. So uh we don't, as marginalized people, as people who are not Black, we don't have to surrender our distinct experiences to form alliance with Black people. And I think that's often the misconception, right? And political action does occur through communities, movements, and our everyday resistance. So what are we choosing to change as we go forward? For example, as we were talking again, in a lot of Asian spaces, one example is the N-word flies left, right, and center. It's accepted. And even I know that some Black people don't take an issue with it, but the reality is that we can still be offended by it, but if we still just, let it slide and we're not calling it out, that's where little things that we can start to actually be active voices. So again, you hear your friends say the N-word, you can check them. And I think
mhm,
that's a lot of times people have felt, well, I know my friend's not it doesn't matter. You
mhm.
still being an active voice is actually part of what coalition building is. So and that's the reason why I have such an issue with just allyship. And what Manmeet Singh talks about is that the language of allyship, it's become insufficient
Mhm,
because it's often allowed people to remain detached from struggles,
mhm,
especially when it doesn't directly affect them. Because allyship is often supporting a cause. When it's convenient, you step away when things become uncomfortable, like the situation I just said, and it still retains that distance from the consequences of oppression. So I think that and what Colin says too is that we need these coalitions across difference, but at the same time, those coalitions, they have to respect unequal positions within systems of power. So what it would mean, I think, and then a question that I kind of come back to is that what would it mean for Punjabi communities to understand the struggle against anti-Blackness as their own responsibility, especially when
yeah,
colorism and caste already position some Punjabis closer to structures of racial power. We have to stop viewing anti-Blackness as just, well, we're doing this to help Black people, or this is a Black issue, quote unquote, but where does it become a responsibility in our daily life? And I think that's where we have to, again, when we talk about moving differently, that is moving
mhm,
differently.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know. I was writing notes, but you said everything I was about to say. Like, high key. Like, I don't even know where to start. One of the things, when we talk about what solidarity looks like, one of the first things I put was speak up. But next to that, I have accomplices, right? And that's why I said, like, oh, that was an easy question. Like, almost like I don't have enough space here to talk about solidarity because I do not think it's actually difficult. And I say that because, yes, it was how I was raised. And so I don't know, you can call it whatever you want, but like speaking up for other people, doing the right thing, it was just so much a part of like my upbringing, who I am, who my people are, who my family is. Also, there might be some, black and white thinking and like some, strong sense of justice thing from being on the spectrum, but like it was just the thing to do. And I remember so vividly being a child, right? And being one of the only people to speak up, right? Like when we have all sat here and agreed that teacher, that was racist, right? We see that even the white kids are like, yeah, no, that was kind of wild, right? And then I'm the only one to say something, right? Which means I'm the one that gets called in the office and threatened with expulsion and blah, 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 blah. This is a private white school, so this wasn't public school. So I think that for me is the one that's like deeply personal, and why I really struggle to call somebody like a good or an ally or innocent, right? If they're not speaking up, if they're not being vocal. And I want to be clear, like a lot of times people will assume that I'm fearless because I'm speaking up. or that, you know, because the rebuttal might be like, oh, I was scared, or I was, and I'm not like knocking you, you're that's valid. I'm not fearless. I'm doing it anyway, right? Like if this thing is happening, if this is wrong, if that means I got to speak up, then I'll do it if nobody else is, because I need to be able to look at myself in the mirror. I need to be able to, like, with myself at night, like I need to be okay with who I am, and I'm not going to allow like other people's actions or certain fears or whatever to just allow me to change my character. And so that's who I am. And so that's like one of the primary things I would say if you want to talk about solidarity, is like speaking up, and speaking up doesn't have to just look like it doesn't have to look like becoming an activist, right? Or getting on social media even. Dare I say, I think it's actually more important. I think we got enough people online being social media. We got enough people, right? I get it. I'm saying when your family members are sitting around the table or sitting in the living room or they're hanging out and they say something that's anti-Black or colorist or effed up, speak up. That's when you say something, right? It's one of the reasons like Black people are so frustrated by, like, you know, white people and other people be like, this isn't the America I know, this is wild. Or, you know, white people telling us, I've had to cut off my family. I didn't know he was like that. You know, you didn't know your uncle was like that, but you know who did? Me. Like, we knew your uncle was like that because we've been on the receiving end of your uncle's bullshit for the longest, right? Like, you didn't know your grandfather was like that, but we did. I promise you we did. And so when you see those things, right? Like the same people who will tell us, why do you always talk about being Black? Like, why do you need to mention you're Black? You're sick now. You don't need to be Black. We're all the same, because they think that equal means same, right? Like, so why do you need to talk about your Blackness? Why do you need to bring these things up? Those will be the same people who sit around and listen to their family, friends, whatever, say anti-Black shit, and then be confused about why we're talking about anti-Blackness. Like they don't know it exists, right? So yeah, speak up. The other thing I would say is, yeah, kind of like you said, like allyship, that's not enough. Allyship is bare minimum at this point, right? Like tolerance doesn't even make you a good person. Allyship is bare minimum right now. And dare I say, like, solidarity for me looks like being an accomplice and then being in community with Black people, because it is quite difficult to dehumanize people that you are genuinely close with, that you are genuinely in community with, that you genuinely care about, that you are, you know, not a transactional relationship, not we're stuck together because of proximity, not whatever else. But when you are genuinely in community with people, it is quite difficult to dehumanize them. It is a little bit more difficult to not give a shit about their well-being, their causes, what's important to them, right? So often, excuse me, we talked about like the rampant individualism here in the US, or here in the West, really. And I would say even if you want to, somebody said, I was listening to an Elliot Sang like live stream, and somebody in his live stream said, and I don't remember the exact quote, and I wish I did, because it was really like perfectly said, but they basically said, like, even if you are just self-interested in the well-being of your own community, like even if you're not in community with other Black people, even if you're not in community with disabled people, even if you're not in community with queer people or otherwise marginalized people, it is important that you understand that the well-being of your community depends upon tackling anti-Blackness. Like anything that you want for your own community, you want better safety. That's what they said. They said, like, even if you were just self-interested in the safety and well-being of your own community, you need to understand how that's connected to anti-Blackness, because you will not accomplish any of your goals until anti-Blackness is eradicated, until it is dealt with, until it is handled, until we tackle it, right? And like I said, there's plenty of education, there's plenty of knowledge. That's the other thing that I would say. When I said solidarity, I put like accomplices, I put speak up, and then I put learn, because the work has been done, right? Like the work is like, the work has been done. Like nobody's out here like coming up with like brand new genius thought that has never been thought before. We've had Black feminist scholars, queer scholars, we've had scholars and thought leaders who've figured this out and written it for us, right? And we know that. But it doesn't do any good if you don't know the information, if you don't know the history, if you don't understand race and racism, if you don't understand the difference, if you don't understand why race is not about individualistic things and it's not about hurt feelings and things of that nature, right? It doesn't do us any good if you don't have the knowledge, if you don't have the history, if you don't truly understand where we came from, why we are where we are now. We're not going anywhere until folks really understand that, right? And I'm not going to get like too deep into that. Just is what I'm saying. And I would say to learn. And I think it is unsurprising if you understand white supremacy. It is unsurprising that the U.S. education system is what it is, that the curriculum in our schools is what it is. My education was paid for. I went to private school my entire life, from preschool through university. And I still think that my education, though based on like what I know now and comparing, slightly better than maybe public school, it is still subpar in comparison to what international schools get in their. A lot of the stuff, like to be on the same level as the things that they learn, whether it's like world history, geography, like anything like outside of like American essentialism, American amazingness, you really have to do that work on your own. Like if you don't have parents who are like, read this as well, do this as well, they're not teaching you right from wrong, right? I mean, the way that I learned about MLK, I hated MLK going into university. I couldn't stand, because I'm like, what I learned about MLK had me mad at that dude. I was pissed. I was like, that doesn't make, why would you? And then I go learn about the real MLK and I'm like, you dirty motherfucker. Like, I'm like, okay, that's what's happening. And again, that goes back to like what Audre Lorde says about like the master's tools and white supremacy constantly reinventing itself and then playing the long game. And it's like, you have to know the game. You have to understand it if you want to play. Like if you want to have a fighting chance. And understanding the first step is like, everything is by design.
Exactly.
None of this is happenstance, right? And understanding that like white supremacy is the water. You're sitting in it, you're living it, you're breathing it, you're swallowing it on accident, you're pissing in it, it is what it is. And so we can't stop talking about this. And you know, I think it kind of pushed me back for a minute because I was like, man, I'm done with I'm not dealing with this abuse. Like I'm not gonna let folks like run me off or say, stop talking about it. Like, you're not gonna shut me up. You might get sick of hearing about it. Doesn't matter. Too bad. Because as long as I'm alive, I understand that like everybody's well-being is dependent upon everybody else. So that's kind of what I wanted to say. So that's kind of my that's like sort of my response to like what does solidarity look like, but also where are we going from here? And I would say that the message of solidarity doesn't just apply to Asian folks, doesn't just Punjabis or Sikhs. That is also to Black folks, right? I think a lot of times we have these conversations and I understand why it happens, why we're constantly saying like, you know, what Black people have accomplished and whatever. We're not perfect either. And I think it is important to understand things outside of ourselves and outside of our culture and so forth. So that's all around. That's solidarity, period. Because again, I really hang my hat on the fact that like community requires accountability. You can't be in community unless you're accountable. And that kind of to me summarizes everything. And that's why one of the first things I mentioned was be in community with other people with who are not like you, whether that's Black people, other people, like be in community. Because if you're truly in community, not I know Black people, I have a Black friend, mind you, I want to tell you, I'm the retired Black friend. Like when white people are like, I got a Black friend, I was the Black friend, right? Like through high school, right? I was a Black, I promise you, them having a Black friend does not make them racist, right? It does not make them not racist just because they have a Black friend. So that is not enough. I don't just mean know a Black person. I don't just mean hang out with them every now and then. I mean truly be in community. And I think that's something that we all need to learn, what being in community looks like, you know, offline as well. I want to be clear. I'm not saying just online. I'm not saying online community is not valid. That would be very ableist for me to say. It is incredibly important. It has been crucial to my own well-being. I'm just saying like it is so important to also have community with your neighbors, like with the people around you. I don't know if you guys heard about the dog recently that was killed. Jameson was killed after the New York Knicks game. It happened because the neighbor thought she heard somebody screaming, which she did, but it was like a happy scream because the Knicks had just won.
I saw that, yeah.
The neighbor called the police. The police show up 20 deep, right? Because LAPD is a gang, let's be real. They show up and they shoot Jameson, right? And the neighbor saying she feels bad. And something that somebody brought up that could have changed all that was knowing your neighbors, like truly being in community with the people that you live near. Because if I hear somebody screaming in my complex, I'm going to knock on a door. I'm not saying I'm busting in. I'm you know, Rambo. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying, you good? Right? Like I see my neighbor and there's a police talking to my neighbor. You good? And I get the nod back, right? Like, hey, what's that? You good? Like the inability to do that not being your first go-to, the first go-to being the police. I think that is, and I'm not blaming the neighbor. I want to be clear. This is on LAPD. I just want to be clear about that. But that is a prime example of why I believe it's so important to be in community with others, for us to be organizing offline and online, and like for us and folks who are able and have like privilege. I think it is it's on y'all to really reach out to those who don't. Because when I talk about people, some people only have online spaces. That is true. When we talk about like boycotts, and sometimes they're effective and sometimes they're not, and sometimes people don't have options, it's because they don't have community. That's really what it comes down to. But any last thoughts? Maybe we can continue this conversation another time. More thoughts,
totally. And I think I want to close off too, even with that, just that conversation about both the system, neighbor, that idea of even knowing your neighbors and things like that too, but especially with how the system, we often hear, the system has failed us, which I don't disagree with. The system has severely failed us, but at the end of the day, the system is working and doing what it was intended to do. It was intended to marginalize people. It was intended to oppress racialized people. And so even when we talk about solidarity and, we're confronted with this question, well, what do I do? And I know we've referenced Audre Lorde a lot, and she writes in Sister Outsider too, that what is most important to me must be spoken, made verbal, and shared, even at the risk of having it bruised or misunderstood. So even where we might mess up or somebody might still misunderstand us, it is about, again, when we talk about this collective struggle, it's about struggling through it together. And that's why grounding like this is so important, because we're trying to learn. We're making the efforts to learn. It doesn't mean that we're going to have it right. It doesn't mean that we won't make mistakes. It doesn't mean that the very subtle and subconscious anti-Black parts of our lives don't not make an appearance, because they will. But it's about actually learning to confront those head on. So again, I think my kind of closing thoughts a lot about it is that, again, when we talk about solidarity, it's not simply, we're not I don't think Black people are asking us to take on their struggle as their own, but it's recognizing that us as Asians, as other racialized people, as marginalized people who aren't Black, that our liberation is impossible when Black people's remains denied. So again, anti-Blackness will survive and will continue to survive when our communities continue to seek proximity to power rather than accountability to one another. So the moment we kind of stop asking ourselves, like, are we complicit? But rather, when we actually start talking about how we are complicit and how we've been complicit, that is when solidarity will become possible. So again, this desire to be accepted by whiteness, it often comes at the cost of distancing ourselves from Blackness. So again, anti-Blackness, it is not simply prejudice as we talk about it. It is a political investment in the racial hierarchy and continuing to maintain it. So again, when we talk about solidarity, it's not simply just being measured by our declarations of support, but like, what are we willing to give up? What are we willing to challenge? What do we want to transform within our own communities? And I think then and only then, that question, when we arrive at that question, that whether that we benefit from anti-Blackness, the question will then be that, okay, once we realize that we do benefit from anti-Blackness, what are we now willing to do once we recognize that we do that? So I think that's where we kind of have to start with this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna stop right here. Otherwise, we're gonna keep going for another hours. But I would say my last thought is, you said that you didn't think that Black people were asking others to take on our causes or the Black struggle. I want to be clear because you used that specific word, struggle, as their own. And I would say that is correct, because I would say my ask would be for others to understand that we have the same struggle.
Because it's not our, sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but again, and when I say that, it's not to say that we shouldn't be engaging with the struggle or we shouldn't be trying to understand it, but it's the fact that that was never our struggle to experience. That is not our oppression to experience. And that's what I think I try to make clear. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I'm saying, like, I'm agreeing with you. Right. And I'm saying that, like, we're not saying like, oh, we need you to do exactly what we're doing. We need you to, it's not that. What I think what would be beneficial more than anything is to realizing how our struggles are connected, is to realize that under at the end of the day, like, it is the same struggle. I think this is what I was looking over here for. These are a couple of my favorite books that I keep close, but like Freedom is a Constant Struggle by Angela Davis. And then The Meaning of Freedom was actually one of my first forays into Black feminist thought. And she talks about struggle specifically. And that's kind of why I thought about that. Struggle is a very specific word in the context of like, talking about liberation and justice and freedom for everybody. And so, yeah, I would agree. Like, I don't necessarily, a lot of times people are like, oh, I feel guilty. We don't need the guilt. We don't need, and we don't need any of that. Like what I need more than anything is I want you to care about the well-being of yourself and your communities and your people and vulnerable people as much as you care about yourself. Right. Exactly. And to do that requires, right, us tackling the same sort of struggle, having the same struggle and tackling the same issues. That's what I want more than anything. And lastly, I'll say, learn to be okay with being uncomfortable and being scared. Exactly. It doesn't require us to be fearless, and it doesn't require us to, and we're not always going to be comfortable. In fact, you're going to be uncomfortable quite a lot. And I would say run towards that discomfort, right? Like in terms of like, if you start to feel uncomfortable, question that, interrogate that. Why are you feeling uncomfortable? Like what's happening right here, right? That's how you'll know. And I would say, you mentioned the necessity, or that it's going to require us to give up and to understand like how we benefit from anti-Blackness and white supremacy. And it's going to require us giving up some things. I would say yes. And it requires us to give up things with the understanding that we're fighting for something even better, bigger, but better for everyone. Right. And that's the big difference. Like if you're okay with part of your family being cool and the other part, you don't give a shit, that's you. Right. But again, that's not me, right? I want everybody to win. I want everybody to eat. I want everybody to be free. And so, yeah, I might have to give up some power or some privileges in certain areas, but it is for something even bigger, because I know that we as people deserve bigger. We deserve better, and we have a real chance of getting there. And she talks about Palestine and what's happening in Gaza right here. She talks about it in these books. And I think it's kind of interesting because she talks about the fact that like older Palestinians were like, we didn't ever think that Palestine might be free in our lifetime. Like we had just like resolved that this would never happen, that we, maybe they will never be free. And that with the sort of like resurgence of, or really I would say maybe even for the first time, like the plight of like Palestine and what's happening in Sudan, with that being in the news and that kind of being in mainstream more than anything. Because again, Angela Davis and other people have been talking about it for years. Like I read this book is old as hell, right? But now it's in like the public consciousness. And so I would say let that be our inspiration, right? That people are seeing, oh, it's possible. This might actually happen in my lifetime. Don't let them make you believe that we can't have better, that police is the only thing we have. Private prisons is the best we got. Like that the world that we have today is all we have. And that's the best we can do, because it's not, we can have better. We can do better. I do think it just requires us understanding that like our struggle is connected and in order to like fight for like that solidarity is absolutely essential. So that's that. Any last words before I get there? I know. So no,
I just want to say thank you so much, Smalls, for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure grounding with you. Again, I hope we can do this more. But again, exactly. Please, let's do this again. I just want to say again, like I said before, grateful is a small word. Again, when we talk about our liberation being tied together, these conversations, these grounding sessions are what's so important, and I'm so grateful for it. And I hope we can do it again sometime.
Absolutely. We'll continue to talk, but hopefully we'll have you back on as your research progresses. I got to hear about it when you're all done and you got the degree and you're doing bigger things. I'm very excited about it. I'm really grateful that you're even doing it, that you reached out to me and you sort of set me down this rabbit hole. As wild as it may have been, it if nothing else, it pushed me to get to prioritize getting back into therapy, and I am there. So. My therapist and I thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you for joining us. If you want more information about what Dilraj is doing, where can people find you, or can they follow you? I know you got a private account.
100%. I have a private Instagram, but please feel free if you ever have any questions about my research or about anything in general. You can reach me on my Instagram, which is zzDilrajZZ, or again, my email, which is my university email, is dsgrewal, which is my last name Grewal @ualberta.ca. Or again, I'm sure Smalls, when she has some clips posted up, my username should be linked. Feel free to shoot me a DM. I'm more than happy to respond.
Absolutely. I will put all of this information in the description box so that you'll have it there. Any information, any resources that we use, we have it there. We also have a master doc with all of the resources and recommended reading. If you want to find out more or read anything else about this, we will hopefully have Dilraj back on, and we will have a more episode, more content coming up. Thank y'all for joining us. I appreciate it. Yes, these clips will be chopped up, so we'll get those posted as soon as we can. And I really appreciate you guys for sticking in there. Those of you who've been watching live this entire time, I appreciate your time. You could have been anywhere else. You shared your time with us, and I'm really grateful for that. So let me see. Let me make this. Oh, okay. All right, there we go. All right, y'all take care. Waheguru ji ka khalsa, waheguru ji ki fateh.